Thank you, Sunil. Thanks for inviting me here to speak. It wasn't that long ago that I was sitting in the student's chair. I remember a lot of the professors here, so it's cool to give it back, so to speak. And it's nice to see some friends that came in to visit to see the presentation. So what I wanted to do in this talk was really give, this can be helpful to anyone in any part of their career, which for me, I wanted to kind of draw the metaphor. I had this interesting conversation when I was going through my internships and whatnot. And it really was this metaphor of, you think you want to go from point A to point B and you just walk a straight line. And really what I've learned in my short career so far is that you really need to be flexible on that line. You need to be willing to go nonlinear through that line, go through different space-time, go through the fourth dimension. And that's really what this talk is about. And so I wanted to walk through my life a little bit to give you guys an understanding of what I mean and kind of, I had ideas of exactly where I wanted to go, and that's not exactly how it turned out, but it turned out well. And I'm gonna show you how it turned out for me, and hopefully it will be inspiration to you. Yes. Cool. So I dug this up off my laptop from that actual laptop. I put it on my Dropbox. So this was my first laptop. It was Sony Vaio. So a funny story about the Sony Vaio, I actually burned in the screen that first day. So I installed Linux. I was really into Slackware and put Slackware on there. And then so in X Windows, you set the Xconfig. And I set the Xconfig wrong. And I put the wrong resolution. And it actually burned in. So there was like a nice burn-in frame around the monitor the entire time I had it through Purdue. And it really, it was gut-wrenching. When you get this new laptop and then all of a sudden it's like, the LCD on it is just like mutating and you're like, no! So really, really bummed out. But I was always into computers. I was really awesome at Total Annihilation. I wasn't like most kids. I feel like I didn't have my first thought until Physics 152. So I'll explain that a little bit more. But But I really wasn't I wasn't a computer scientist in high school like a lot of the folks that I end up hiring now or a lot of the folks that come into Purdue. I dabbled with it, but I always used friends to figure out how to write programs. I really didn't think about it myself that much. So when I started Purdue, I was actually an ECE student. Like a lot of folks end up entering into Purdue as a freshman engineering student. And so my first EE 201 test happened to coincide with an interesting thing. So Sirius, the computer security department, had an undergrad research flyer that was on campus. And I was super psyched. I was like, undergrad research in computer science. And Professor Wagstaff was there. And Eugene Spafford, actually, who I didn't know at the time, was there. And I didn't know how cool he was at the time. And so I took this first EE 201 test, and I don't know if how many of you were ECE students and then switched to computer science student? One volunteer, okay. Oh, sort of, yes, I know. Admitting failure is difficult, but I'll admit failure on EE 201. So the first test, they actually put you in a room, and it's not just 5 multiple choice questions, it's A through L. So there's no chance that you can guess an answer. There's no probability that's going to get you through this test. I think I didn't even check the score. I think the average was a 40, but it wasn't a great experience in my college career. And at that point, I was kind of stumped. So I go to this undergrad research thing, and I'm really excited about computer science. I went with a friend of mine, Andy Hauerselt at the time. And we went to this undergrad research, and I'm getting really excited. Oh, I'm going to do some research. And then at the end, I'm talking to Eugene Spafford, and I'm like, hey, look, I'm really interested in computer science. What should I do? I'm really interested in computer security specifically. And he's like, well, what's your major? And I was like, ECE. He's like, wrong major, go to computer science. I'm like, yes! He gave me what I needed, which was impetus to go get a computer science degree. So right after that, literally the next day, I showed up at the computer science hall in the gymnasium and talked to my career counselor there and started the ball rolling. And it was really cool. It was like computer science. You could take foreign languages. You could meet girls. It was good. And so I was pretty pumped, because in ECE, it's like, you must do analytical stuff only and, become a robot. But in CS, it's more broad. And I'll explain later, like, that actually is all the stuff that I use now, especially in management. So so Eugene Spafford, totally owe him props. He helped me out a lot. So how did I get into computer security? So I went down a lot of different paths through my short, 4 years in college. So I read Cuckoo's Egg. Someone gave me Cuckoo's Egg. I don't know. I think it was my mom. I'm not sure. But Cuckoo's Egg is this awesome book. It's this super spy thriller, but it's about computers. So everyone in this room gets excited. And so, they're talking about, I don't know, ENIACs, or I don't exactly remember, but you're dialing in modems, you're war dialing. It was really, really neat. So I ended up magically, my mom put in a phone call to a friend of hers at Global Integrity, or at SAIC, and then that ended up having a connection to Global Integrity. And then I ended up getting an internship as kind of an unknowing guy. I didn't know that much at Global Integrity. And so Global Integrity did penetration testing. They did a lot of consulting for the government. They watched firewalls for different big, national defense guys like the Air Force. And so it was this spinoff from SAIC, and I got surrounded by all these computer security guys. I was like, this is pretty cool. And so there were all these people around me with tons more knowledge than I. And I got sat in they put me in the room with the interns. It was like a room with a desk and then a bunch of file cabinets and stuff around. So I saw no one during the day. And hopefully someone would come in, like my boss or something would come in and be like, hi, Mike, bye. They really weren't giving me that much stuff to do. But I was poking around with Linux at the time. So I got Linux running and I was like, this is really cool. And so I was learning a lot on my own, just powering through, trying to get X Windows working. And there's a huge learning curve on this Linux stuff, when you're getting rolling, back when it was Slackware and you're compiling everything yourself, there was a big ramp up. At some point so I ended up actually getting a job with MITRE for a summer that I actually stayed at Purdue to do some summer school, so I wouldn't have to graduate in 5 years. And I had an internship for 2 weeks with no, they were like, hey, you need to do security penetration testing for this WebLogic server. And I was like, I sat there for two weeks in this lab alone with no support. And I was on a Sun, and it would beep every time I hit escape on VI, and it was going nuts. And and so I ended up actually bowing out of that internship. And I really figured out at some point in that lifespan that security was cool. And I learned a lot from getting a little bit deep into it, and I ended up coming back to it later. But at that point in time, I was like, I'm not super pumped about security stuff. And it ended up happening that there was a bioinformatics. At the time, it was CS 490B. Professor Grama, who's in the audience, was part of that starting class. And that was 2002, I think, was the timeline on that. It was right after the Human Genome Project had just been, we had the genome, big competition, billions of dollars. Craig Venter did his thing and tried to beat out the Human Genome Project. It was a very exciting time. And I was probably reading that stuff and hearing about, DNA, what's that? And I'd remembered in high school that biology was kind of interesting. There were a lot of unsolved problems. And so I was like, I wanted to get an edge on this class. It was CS 490B, it's beginner class. I want to be the guy that comes into the class with all the knowledge, so I'm learning it again, right? That's how you always ace any class, right? And so I was like, open source was kind of, was gaining traction in the world. So I was like, let me go I was thinking, well, I need to get an internship for next summer, and maybe I should go join an open source project that I could potentially get a job at for the summer. And I ended up picking this thing called OmniGene, which was an open source, this is from the webpage, but it was an open source project that was trying to put a kind of middleware, I hate that word, but a middleware layer above all genomic databases, so you could be like, I want gene 21 from the human genome, and no matter which database that occurred in, you'd always get some sort of XML document in reply that was normally formatted. And so I joined this open source project, and then I started, adding some code. I was writing Jython. If anyone, how many of you have used Jython? Yes, it's Python, but has Java bindings. It's quite cool. So I got excited about this Jython thing, and they were working on it. I was like, I know Jython because I like Python. And so I ended up working on OmniGene. And then I ended up befriending the guy who was running the project, and then he invited me for a summer internship at MIT. So for a summer, I worked at this pretty cool, I was working in this lab at so at the time, it was Whitehead Institute. It turned into Broad Institute, and they were doing all the human genome stuff. The human genome stuff at the time, I didn't really fully get it when I was at that point, but it was kind of winding down. They were trying to look for like what is the next thing, and I learned a valuable lesson there. I learned that you can be passionate about something but still bored, and it was really interesting because the work that I had been given wasn't super pumped about, but I was still in a space that I was excited about. And so it was kind of one of these like moments where you're like, all right, like I'm at the place that all the science is happening, but I'm still not working on stuff that I'm so super passionate about. And I'm not passionate about this specific unit of work, right? And it was a big moment for me in learning that. So more on the bioinformatics stuff. This was my lab group. So Chris Bailey Kellogg, he used to be a professor here. He's now at Dartmouth. Kyle, I forgot his last name, sorry. I think it was Krill, but I'm not sure. But these were my lab partners, and we were working on protein folding stuff. So how many of you guys know about protein folding? It's really cool. It's really cool. So I'm going to enthuse you with protein folding, and you're going to get really excited about it. So I got super passionate about working on the protein folding problem. And so Chris Bailey Kellogg was working on this problem with mass spectrometers, trying to combine those with theoretical models of proteins. And I was working on some algorithm that a professor in the math department had come up with. And it was a big stretch for my brain. And I learned a valuable lesson in that undergrad research. I might not be the best researcher. And that was really important, and it's really good that I learned some of that. But and also what Chris taught me was a very valuable lesson, was that not everyone's as extroverted as me, and not everyone gets as excited as I do, obviously, right? And so it was really important because there's so many people in our field that don't express how exciting computer science is, and they're like, boom, bow, like nuclear explosion, like Battlestar Galactica, like, that's very rare. Usually it's like you discover something, you're in the lab at like 3 in the morning, you had just chugged a Dr. Pepper, and like, that's when you make your big discovery and no one's there. You like post on Facebook, like going home, and it's really cold and it's snowing, right? And that's when the big discoveries happen, right? You're like kind of isolated. But that's the beauty of computer science, is that you can do that, right? And protein folding is incredible. So this is a protein, right? And this is called an alpha helix, and these are beta sheets. And when I saw this, and people said you can try to predict what this. So this thing is made up of amino acids, right? And it gets folded. So anytime you denature a protein, you get all the amino acids laid out in a single line. It will fold up back into that at any point. That's so cool. Like, that is like the coolest thing ever. And you're saying that like I can try to compute that? Like that's pretty badass. And so like my passion for this problem was such that I was like, hey, look, like if I can work on this problem, that would be incredible, and I'd be super, super psyched to work on this problem. And so on the advice of my brother, so I was like, okay, I don't want to go somewhere cold. Like Purdue has done it to me. Like I'm done, right? And I wanted to be blue skies, nice weather, and I was like, literally the variance in San Diego, they say bad weather is June gloom. How many of you guys have heard of June gloom? Okay, June gloom is when it gets gray outside for a month. Literally gray. That's as bad as it gets. Normally the variance of weather is like 70 to 80 degrees, and it's blue skies every day. It's gorgeous. And so I packed up all my stuff, put it in a car, got the car transported to San Diego. I didn't have a place to stay, so I picked an extended stay hotel. And I just moved to this extended stay hotel. I had like $5,000. And I was like, all right, until, I'll spend money until the $5,000 is out, and then I'll really like move to wherever I have to. And so, it was an incredible experience in retrospect. I got a list of, so my goal was to find so listen to how ridiculous this was. I wanted to find a bioinformatics startup that was working on protein folding? How many do you think there actually were? 1, 2? It was ridiculously dumb. But it was really great experience. And so I got a list of all the venture capitalists in San Diego. And I actually wrote a shell script to email spam all of them. So great use of my shell scripting abilities, wrote a bash script, and it was it didn't even customize. It was the most ridiculous like bash script ever. And so I think my conversion rate was like, I got six like meet and greets, like who is this guy? Like maybe I should meet him, he seems wacky. But there were a lot of like little tiny entrepreneurs there. It wasn't, and also this was 2003, so this was like, I think it was post-Iraq War or like right at the tail end. It was also like right after the bubble. So 2002, engineering hiring wasn't like it is today, and no one was hiring. So it was a very, very different environment. So I actually got to the point where I was printing out physical resumes, and then to motivate myself, I'd go door to door to HR departments. Can you imagine doing that? You like go to this company, you like go to the receptionist and you're like, hey, I'd like to talk to your VP of HR and give you my resume. And I was hoping like maybe I'd meet an engineer on the way to the door that I could like sweet talk into like talking about Linux or like get something. And I actually met a guy that was smoking outside this like systems biology startup. And we struck up a conversation and I got his card, but nothing ended up coming of it. But it was entertaining to say the least. And I learned a lot about like salesmanship and like how you actually like, get a schedule together even when you don't have a structure. It's really, really tough. And I feel for anyone that doesn't have a job, it's really, really hard to get motivated every day to keep on the path to trying to find a job. So this is what I didn't know. And so this is 2011. I couldn't find a chart of 2003, but this is where this blue sort of I'm colorblind. So this big I think blue thing represents $11.8 billion in startup investment money, and so that's all in the San Francisco Silicon Valley zone. Everywhere else doesn't have as big of a circle. So disproportionately, it ends up being probably an 80-20 rule. 80% of the investment in the US is happening in San Francisco and Silicon Valley. And so when I moved out to San Diego, you see that? It's not very big. FYI, like bad info from my brother. So not so great. But it ended up that I ended up with 2 job offers. One job offer was in Maryland, working at a computer security firm. Rick Kennel, who is actually an ECE professor, connected me with a former student of his that was working on this intrusion detection system. And I got a job offer from them to work on a compiler, which was like, oh, that's super cool, like compiler, but it's in Maryland. And then I got another job offer for less money, but stock options, in Silicon Valley at Google. And they were pretty much the only company hiring in Silicon Valley at the time, hiring tons of engineers. And it wasn't that glamorous, okay? So my first job at Google was, so when the offer came in, it was like compiler engineer or support engineer on the Google search appliance. Like, how do you balance those two? And the compiler job was gonna pay more. And so like you're coming out of school, you're like, the differential in those 2 jobs was like $10,000 or $12,000. And it just seemed kind of ridiculous to be like, oh, like I'm gonna take the less money and the less glamorous job, but like maybe it will work out. And so I networked in San Diego and I met this VC and I told them, hey, I have 2 job offers. One at a startup that's doing intrusion detection stuff in Maryland, and then one at this company called Google. He was like, dude, you gotta go to Google. And so the power of the network in that situation, I mean, I also had my brother who had experience in Silicon Valley, but I didn't trust him at this point. What was that, going to Google and taking this leap of faith that it was going to work out, and I was going to be a support engineer, and then on the sales call, when you're getting sold a job, it sounds very different than potentially when you get there. It was like, oh, well, maybe you'll work shift schedule. And I was like, shift schedule? I like nights. It was 3 months of working nights. So 9 p.m. till 5 a.m. I was at the Googleplex. And so it was very kind of humanizing to take that job. But I learned a lot from doing that support role. And what I made a point to do, I quickly figured out that engineering was number one at Google. And so I tried everything I could do to figure out how could I get into engineering. And so this is that point in that metaphor of like the straight line. The straight line would have been going directly into engineering. My friend who referred me, who is my brother's roommate, said, Mike, you're not going to get in the front door of Google. They're only hiring PhD and master's students, and then only ACM champions if you're a bachelor's of science. Google was only like 300 or 400 engineers at that point, right? And so he's like, come into this other path, and then figure out a way into the actual engineering department. And I took that advice, and I became friends with all these engineers. And then, magically, a guy in the group that I was on took a vacation and handed me scripts that were for the ClickFraud AdSense protection scripts, okay? So at this point, AdSense had just launched. So this is now a $1 billion business. But at the time, it was like 100 megs of logs a day. It was very easy to process with a single Python script on a single box. But then the Python script, by the time like I got the scripts, Python script was like taking way too much memory. I was like, hey, this stuff is not, like the way we're doing it is not great. So I took it on myself to like work on it and perfect it and turn it into something cool. And then I ended up building essentially the first version of the ClickFraud scripts that ended up turning into the system that we ended up deploying at Google. And so I became a year after I joined, I had a discussion with my manager. My manager was like, we want you to stay in this group, in the support group, for another year. And I said, it would be ill-advised for you, and I'd be adding more value to the company if I was in engineering. And then that got me into engineering. So it takes a lot to get to where you want to go. Getting to the places you want to go take a lot of creativity sometimes. And getting that inertia to get into engineering without interviewing a lot of people had to interview into engineering. I said I didn't want to be interviewed. Got into engineering in a different way. And so it's an important life lesson. Like a lot of, Professor Comer was talking about, how he got the vax and all these lucky scenarios. It's about being lucky, but it's also about being kind of pointed in the right direction. And this was an example. I later ended up I'd say the culmination of a lot of the ClickFraud work I did. We wrote a paper about a botnet that we found that was causing some ClickFraud problems for Google, and this was a really cool achievement, right? It was like got to actually they left their backup files of Emacs to leave backup files of the botnet control scripts. So we actually put the control scripts in the paper. So if you want to see how a botnet runs, kind of cool. So this was quite an experience and quite a different path than I envisioned of go to San Diego, get the bioinformatics degree, or go work on bioinformatics, solve a protein folding problem, win, right? Like that didn't happen. This happened, and it was really cool. And that 3 a.m. Dr. Pepper, so that actually happened when I created my first kind of statistical graph of the signal that I was looking for, and it actually just when you get that moment where you see a signal and it actually shows different pieces of data like spam and not spam, you're like yes, right? It's like the coolest. It's the coolest experience. I mean, it's why we're all in the room. A lot of us are in the room. Is those are the moments you live for, right? Like when you write a SQL server and you can actually query it yourself, like you built it. You're like, this is cool. So this was a moment for me. There are a bunch of moments in here, but that really culminated it. So little side tangent. My brother ended up starting Yelp in 2004, and I was like, dude's crazy. Like he's not, I don't know what Jeremy's doing, but great. Good luck on the startup. I'm at Google pre-IPO. Have fun. And so I actually took a week of work to help them launch. So I took PTO from Google and then went and when they launched the site, they were expecting large droves of traffic, and they had like 10 visitors, right? So I set up their first AdWords account to like drive traffic to the site. So we spent thousands of dollars on AdWords to try to drive traffic to Yelp. And the first idea was a flop. So it took about a year for them to figure out exactly what Yelp looks like today. And so 2007, January, I was complaining about like, I'm kind of bored. I'm not, I was doing the normal complaints that you do, right? When you're kind of, you've kind of hit your max wherever you're at. And he was like, all right, we're going to Argentina for New Year's. And so we went to Argentina. Lo and behold, it was a big recruiting trip, right? It was like 2 weeks of like, you must join Yelp, you must join Yelp. And so finally I accepted. I was like, all right, we're going. Yeah, I want to work on this thing. It sounds really cool. For me, Yelp was obvious. It was a utility. It was working. It was obvious to me because I was in San Francisco. I was seeing the impact on like everyone. I was going to all the Yelp Elite events. I was seeing the community grow. And for me, it was just a scale issue, right? And so I joined in 2007. I became a manager of the search team in 2008, and later the spam and mobile teams. And then I became a director of engineering in 2009, and then later VP of engineering in 2010. And this arrow is actually, that's me on the bottom of the pyramid. So it was a fun offsite. So how big was Yelp when I joined? So just to give you kind of an idea, we had a few 100,000 of searches a day, and most of those were for health checks from the load balancer. Okay? So I'm coming from Google with terabytes of logs, and then sit down, take over the search engine, cat, grep are my friends, right? Like that's all I've got, right? It's like that's my toolbox. We had 6 developers total. I was like, what did I join? I sit down, it's like, these are all the developers. You're coming from Google where it's like, it had gone from 1,000 people to 16,000 people. And now I'm at a company where literally all the developers fit at this table. Just crazy different like mentality where you're seeing this. And I told the CFO, like, or he wasn't the CFO at the time, but he was our finance guy. I was like, Yelp's going to be a multi-billion-dollar company. He was like, Mike, you're crazy. I was like, let time tell. And it's worked out, but that was I saw the idea at the beginning, and I was like, this thing really has feet, and it's been incredible to watch. So, I joined right here, and now we're at 78 million monthly visitors. And then I joined right here where we were, 850,000 reviews, and now we're at 30 million reviews. And we have a massive mobile team that works on Android, iPhone, iPad, and m.yelp.com. Mobile didn't exist when I started. It's crazy that like everyone now in this room, we could add up all the phones and make like a massive data center, right? It's like it's pretty cool that like we now have these very powerful computing devices in our pockets, and we're doing millions of searches a day, and we have over 100 developers. So just an incredible growth story, and some of the folks in this room have actually interned at Yelp, and it's just really cool to see the kind of getting that cross blending of like coming back to Purdue, telling the story. It's really cool to like kind of see how there's that book Outliers. It's like a lot of this stuff is the time you're born, the skills that you have, but it's about putting them together, right? So kind of this is kind of the career advice / kind of thinking about your life and the special moment that we have in computer science right now. It might not be like this for a very long time. So each of these vectors, this is my math section. So each of these, I was never good at vectors. Aaron Alt was my friend in linear algebra. He helped me a lot. But these are the vectors, I say, of life and where you want to go in your career. So you have economic interests, obviously, right? You need to make money. You have intellectual interests, right? You want to be at the creative edge of what you're doing. You want to make a social impact. At least some of us do. I'd hope that most of us want to make a positive social impact on the world. And as computer scientists, right now, you can do that. You can go out there and you can pick the social impact that you want to be part of. And that's a very unique time in history, I think. So economic, this is cool. This is actually my mom at the NYSE. So she got up there on the stage. That's my brother right there, and that's me going woo woo. It was quite incredible to be there. But for folks that don't know, equity ownership is kind of one of the main drivers in Silicon Valley and elsewhere for startups, which is you can get options or you can get stock. And if you're a private company, you can end up going from private to public, which is a very cool transition in a company's lifespan. And it's one that probably won't happen many times for most of us in this room. I've seen it happen twice, which is this is a very rare case, but very cool. And this is one of the big drivers in Silicon Valley. Is you can take a small idea of 6 engineers, grow an organization to over 100 engineers, and at this point the company's over 1,000 employees in a very, very short amount of time. I've only been at Yelp about 6 years, so that's not an incredible lifespan. I feel very young compared to some of the histories that we've heard and the punch cards and all these things. Like, I wasn't there with the punch cards. But it's really cool to see this kind of growth happen in such a small period of time. The social impact. So in Yelp's case, the mission of companies in Silicon Valley and elsewhere is critical to any company having a shared vision of what your employees are working on. And at Yelp, it's connecting people with great local businesses. That's what we do. That's what every engineer and every employee comes in with that mission statement. That's what we're repeatedly given. And what's incredible is that the social impact part of what we do is actually being felt. And it's actually being seen in research. So from this Harvard professor, Michael Luca, he found that a 1-star increase in Yelp rating leads to a 5 to 9% increase in revenue. 2, this effect is driven by independent restaurants. Ratings do not affect restaurants with chain affiliation. Chain restaurants have declined in market share as Yelp's penetration has increased. This is actually, the data they used was pretty interesting. It was actually revenue data from Washington State that he used to cross-reference with Yelp ratings over time. And so this is pretty incredible. It's really saying that Yelp's having a massive impact. We're channeling economic funds to the businesses that people really like, and chain restaurants they're not getting as far as they used to. And it's really about democratizing that reputation, right? On my way to Purdue, I stopped by this place, Mr. Gyro, right? And Mr. Gyro has been, Alex is the operator, and he's been there for 10 years, and it was on my way. I think I was gonna turn on to 65. I was right on 30 East from Chicago. And I was at a stoplight, pulled out my iPhone. This is not legal. And I looked up, I saw the sign and I was like, oh, is it good? Is it not gonna, And they had 3 reviews, all 5 stars. So I was like, I gotta stop in, right? And I actually spent money there because I found 3 reviews, 5 stars. I gotta go check out this place. I gotta add my opinion to it. It was okay. It wasn't great. It wasn't as healthy as I thought. I was thinking gyros, Greek salads. Like, I'm from California, San Francisco. Like, we're healthy, right? I was like, oh, get some tomatoes. Like, literally came with 2 tomato slices and like half of a raw onion and like tons of gyro meat and then like some fried pita bread. It was pretty gross. But anyways. It was, it's about your opinion, right? And I can add my information to that rating. It had 3 reviews, so it's not, I wouldn't say it's wisdom of the crowds at that point. But it's really cool that I talked to him a little bit, and he was very excited. He was just very excited that he was the owner, and it's cool to see that in your community. It adds a special flavor that I think is very unique about the world. And it's nice to see that Applebee's this place isn't turning into a Starbucks, right? Like that Simpsons episode where, it's like, this place turned into a Starbucks. Every place turns into a Starbucks at the same time. So this is really cool to be, we did this, right? And you can do this in a very short amount of time with the kind of technological leverage that you get with all of the technologies that you've heard about today from the previous lecture. This is the type of stuff happening. And it's just really cool to see how the world is shifting. So intellectual interest, this is the last vector that I'm going to talk about. I'm actually This is actually the end. But you get at the edge of computer science. As the previous lecturer was talking about, the amount of data that private companies like Yelp are generating is massive. We have tons of data. The new idea of a data scientist is real. Like, you need to come up with hypotheses. You need to write MapReduce and Hive jobs to figure out if your hypotheses are correct, or whatever tool comes in the next 3 years. But this is kind of, if you want to be on the creative edge, this is it, right? These data sets, asking questions. I literally was literally at Google. I was there when the first email got sent out about MapReduce and Sawzall. So Sawzall is a language that Google wrapped MapReduce in. And I was there when Rob Pike sent out the email, hey, we have a beta of this thing called Sawzall, and I was like, I'm there. Like that clicked in my head. Oh, this is like such a powerful tool. I had no concept of like how many machines I was using or running on, but I saw it and I was like, oh, I can ask really interesting questions that I couldn't before. So I was actually there at the beginning of this history at Google, I feel like that was one of the big birthplaces of all this stuff, because the MapReduce paper came out of it, which led to Hadoop in the open source world. You can work on products that affect millions of people in a very consumer way. A lot of these companies, you can really affect society as a whole, and it really kind of, that really tingles you, right? It gets your creative juices flowing. And you can build the world into a more positive place. There's a lot of negativity around, and this is kind of a chance to work on something that you really feel will make the world a better place. So, with that, thank you.